Welcome back to the Mirror Moves, where entitlement runs dry and justice always finds its way downstream. Living out by Lake Clearwater was my idea of heaven. I'd moved there precisely for the peace it offered, the quiet ripple of water at dawn, and a natural rhythm that comes with wildlife conservation. As a federal wildlife ranger, my duty was simple but profound: protect the lake and every creature relying upon it. Most people in our community respected this. They understood that our water supply was not just an amenity, it was a lifeline for countless animals and the ecosystem itself. But then again, most people weren't Karen Fletcher. Karen owned one of the grander lakefront properties, an imposing mansion overlooking Lake Clearwater. She prided herself on appearances, always maintaining a perfect facade of meticulously trimmed hedges and a pristinely landscaped lawn. In Karen's world, everything was carefully controlled, down to the very flow of the lake itself. She acted as though she had some divine right over the lake, often reminding others that her taxes supposedly paid for all. I kept to myself, mostly performing my duties quietly. Occasionally, I'd see Karen watching from afar, always with suspicion in her narrowed eyes. She distrusted anything she couldn't dominate or control, and my quiet presence at the station downstream seemed to irritate her immensely. One sweltering summer afternoon, our relationship took a turn I'd never imagined. I was in the wildlife station, carefully recording data about a recent otter family nesting downstream when the tap in the small kitchen sputtered, then ran dry. Confused, I tried again. Nothing. Alarmed, I stepped outside to investigate. My heart sank when I saw the empty pipe, clearly severed and dangling uselessly by the lakeside. The water line feeding the entire station, and thus the protected habitats downstream, had been deliberately cut. I rushed up the hill towards Karen's property. She stood by her porch, calmly sipping iced tea and supervising her gardener. "Karen, did you cut the water line?" I demanded urgently. She looked up coolly, a dismissive smirk crossing her lips. "It was disturbing my property. Besides, I don't recall authorizing you to use MY Lake." My jaw tightened in disbelief. "Karen, that water line serves the federal wildlife station downstream. You're endangering countless animals and habitats. You can't just—" She raised a perfectly manicured hand, silencing me abruptly. "Maybe next time, you'll consider permission before assuming access." My pulse thundered in frustration and disbelief. This wasn't just about inconvenience. It was about lives and habitats. "This isn't about me, Karen. The wildlife downstream depend on this water. You must fix this immediately." She shrugged dismissively. "I don't think I will. The lake looks better without your ugly pipe." I returned to the station, my mind racing. Immediately, I contacted my superiors, who mobilized quickly. Within hours, a federal inspection team arrived to assess the damage. The disruption was worse than initially thought. Water flow interruption threatened several endangered species downstream. The inspector, Agent Laura Hartley, frowned deeply upon hearing the story. "This is serious," she stated clearly. "Whoever did this will face federal charges." I guided her to Karen's property, anxiety knotting my stomach. Karen met us outside, arms folded defiantly. "Federal property?" Karen scoffed. This is my land, my lake. Agent Hartley spoke calmly, firmly. Ms. Fletcher, Lake Clearwater is federally protected, and you've unlawfully disrupted essential conservation infrastructure. This is a serious violation. Karen's smirk wavered. I did nothing wrong. Agent Hartley glanced at me, subtly shaking her head. We'll see about that. A full investigation will begin immediately. Be ready. Karen's face turned pale. Clearly, she hadn't anticipated federal involvement, much less consequences. As federal crews began emergency repairs to restore water flow, the local community became aware of Karen's reckless actions. Many neighbors visited, offering apologies and support. Margaret, an elderly woman living nearby, approached quietly, visibly upset. How could Karen do something like this? Margaret sighed, shaking her head sadly. Doesn't she realize how fragile the balance is? I sighed, sharing her frustration. Karen only saw her own convenience, not the bigger picture. As days passed, community outrage grew. The local press picked up the story, labeling Karen's actions as environmentally reckless. Karen attempted to defend herself, claiming ignorance of the station's function, but her neighbors knew better. Publicly shamed, her carefully constructed image began crumbling. The official federal report didn't help Karen either. It detailed how her selfishness nearly destroyed critical habitats for countless species downstream. The evidence was damning. Faced with the undeniable facts, Karen appeared at a community meeting, desperate to salvage her reputation. She stood nervously, her confident demeanor shattered. I didn't realize the damage, she stammered weakly. It wasn't intentional. I stood calmly, addressing her directly but respectfully. Karen, your actions endangered wildlife that has relied on this ecosystem for generations. Your disregard for the lake's value beyond your property was incredibly reckless. Nature doesn't belong to any one person. We're its caretakers, not owners. Margaret nodded slowly. We trusted you to respect our community. You betrayed that trust. For once, Karen had no comeback, visibly shaken by the honest rebuke from people she'd always assumed supported her. The next few weeks brought significant changes. Karen faced hefty federal fines and legal action. Under scrutiny, she finally hired contractors to fully repair and upgrade the damaged infrastructure, supervised closely by federal inspectors. Yet the most surprising transformation was Karen herself. She began visiting the wildlife station regularly, initially forced by court order as part of her community service. Gradually, however, genuine interest replaced reluctant duty. She asked thoughtful questions about wildlife conservation, listening intently, often lingering long after required. One afternoon, I noticed Karen quietly observing a family of otters playing downstream. Her face softened, eyes reflecting genuine awe. As she turned, catching my glance, she smiled awkwardly. I never understood, she admitted quietly. I was blind. My selfishness nearly ruined something truly beautiful. Her honesty surprised me. Karen, caring for nature is caring for ourselves and future generations. This lake belongs to everyone and everything that relies upon it. She nodded slowly, thoughtfully. I understand that now. Months later, Karen became a vocal advocate for Lake Clearwater's conservation. She hosted educational meetings at her property, teaching neighbors about local wildlife and environmental responsibility. Her mansion transformed into a hub for awareness and genuine community engagement. The change within our community was profound. Neighbors became active in local conservation efforts, inspired by Karen's genuine transformation. One evening, Margaret approached me, her eyes shining warmly. I never thought Karen capable of change. You gave her a second chance when most wouldn't. It wasn't me. I smiled gently, glancing at Karen enthusiastically discussing habitat protection with others. Nature taught her better than I ever could. As the sun set over Lake Clearwater that evening, painting the sky in brilliant hues, I felt deep satisfaction. A potentially devastating crisis had sparked meaningful change, healing not just infrastructure, but the very heart of our community. I watched Karen speaking passionately about the otters she'd once nearly destroyed. It was the clearest evidence of nature's power, not just to sustain life, but to transform lives. Lake Clearwater was no longer just Karen's backdrop for privilege. It had become her greatest teacher. And our community, once divided by selfishness, was united again by a shared purpose and profound respect. Karen had cut off our water line, but karma returned stronger, clearer, and deeper than ever before. And in that flow, true community finally took root.